Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Now Write Your Book Summit. In this session, I want to introduce you to Steve PIERSANTI. Steve PIERSANTI, the founder of Berrett, Koehler Publishers, almost 30 years in the business, and it's an amazing story, and I'll introduce you to that in a minute. But I want to just pick up on this topic of writing books, because the question is, why write books? And if you need some extra help on that score, we have a range of tools that'll help you. We've got a checklist that goes through the 12 stages of writing and publishing a book, and you can get that on that website, youshouldwriteabook.co.uk. Because if it's not clear by now, this Now Write Your Book Summit is very much helping you to see now you should write your book. You should write a book, but the checklist will help. We've also created a software app called the Author's Grid, and that will help you keep yourself accountable as you go through this process. But one of the things that we've been doing on this summit is asking the question to our best-selling authors and publishers, constantly the question of why write a book. And why you should write a book is that we're living in the attention age. We're living in the attention age, or what Thomas Davenport and John Beck call the attention economy. People's attention is very short, and it is focused on a range of things. So basically, people are focused on their topics, on their issues, and not on yours. They're not interested in you. That sounds very transactional, that you might be trying to break into somebody's attention. But if you want to help them, if you want to serve them in a profound way, in the way that perhaps Karen Dillon has been talking about most recently in her work with Clayton Christensen, How Will You Measure Your Life? Or Penny Power, in terms of businesses personal. People write books, we write books. You might want to write a book that will make a profound difference for someone. So we have to somehow now think about, how do we get that book into their hands? And partly we get it into their hands by marketing and taking charge of that process, particularly if we're taking the self-publishing route. But you can also do this through a publisher. And there are thousands of publishers out there. And they're putting a whole range of books on the internet. In fact, let me see if I've got this. Yes, currently on Amazon, there are 32.8 million books for sale. 22 of those in paperback. So that's an awful lot of books that are out there. And one of the things I hope this summit will achieve is help you to see that you can get a book published, but I'm urging you to write the best book you can. And that may mean collaborating with other writers, if you're not the kind of person who wants to write or can write very well, or editors. Editors has been a surprising theme of this summit, really. Find someone who can help you edit your book, get your book into a shape that is very, very persuasive. The book itself, it's not enough just to publish a book. You can take any document you like and get it printed. That's not the same as putting a good book out there. Because your book can do a number of things, can't it? And we've touched on those throughout the summit. Your book can inspire people by sharing your message. It can attract new clients in the same way that VERNE Harnish talked about and Daniel Priestley talked about. Check out those interviews if you're watching this on replay, by the way. The book can showcase your services and your expertise in the way that Marshall Goldsmith does in his 3 different books, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, Mojo and Triggers, how he described the different things that those books did. The book can be a platform for you in the same way that Don Moorhouse found when people suddenly started approaching him to become a non-executive director in their firms because he'd published a book. That was a completely unexpected bonus of publishing a book. A book can generate profits for you. VERNE Harnish makes the clear point, and Daniel Priestley as well, if you've seen that interview, where if you take the self-publishing route, you can have much greater control of the economics of this process. You probably won't make as much revenue from the sales of the book itself as you hope for. You might only sell a few hundred or a few thousand copies, but you will make a greater proportion as profit. your authority definitely is increased by writing a book. And we saw in Lynda Gratton's interview right at the beginning of this summit, and Peter Larange as well, that it's to some extent about credibility. Tommy Weir, the scientist in residence at MIT, talked about that. If you want some credibility and positioning, then a book is a fantastic way to do that. Alok Sinha, the CEO of Capita Services in India, also was striving for that when he wrote his first book. I think an important point that I want to make in this final session of the summit is that writing a book in part is about building a legacy. It could be a legacy for your industry. It could be a legacy for your business, could be a legacy for you. And so it's a very serious task to write a book. And let me ask you the question, what's your legacy? What is it that you want to be known for? How do you want to make a difference in the world? And I'll come back to that at the end of this interview with Steve PIERSANTI. Steve PIERSANTI founded Berrett Koehler Publishers 30 years ago. There are so many publishers in the world. This is the Writers and Artists Yearbook that lists all the publishers that a writer can get hold of. And look, it's a huge, thick tome. It's updated every year because they change, but this has lists in tiny, tiny type, thousands of publishers and how to get access to them. So there are many publishers out there if you want to take the mainstream publishing route. But Steve PIERSANTI is regarded by Lynda Gratton, who started this summit, as the best editor. The best editor, someone who will help you format your work. I'm not suggesting you work with Steve. Give it a shot if you want, but I think it's instructive to explore his thoughts on how do you write a really, really good book. Did I play you the little interview of Lynda Gratton saying what she thought of him? I'm not sure I did. Let me play for you now what Lynda Gratton thinks of Steve PIERSANTI.
I moved to Berrett Koehler, who, by the way, are fantastic publishers, and Steve PIERSANTI, who runs Berrett Koehler, in my view, is the best editor I've ever had. Most editors don't do anything at all.
So Lynda's very, very clear, and Lynda Gratton, if you remember, has written a dozen books, and most recently 100-Year Life, which sold 500,000 copies in Japan. New book just coming out this year. Good luck with that, Lynda. So her word stands for a lot in my book. That's a very odd phrase to use. So let's take a look at Steve PIERSANTI. He's a very quiet man, very understated. He's sitting in his home office, by the way, and you'll see him surrounded by the manuscripts of all the books he's worked on over the years, and he has worked on some pretty amazing books. So pay close attention. I hope you've got a notebook with you, a pen, paper, a device to take notes on. There is so much to help you craft a really good book here. Let me introduce you to Steve PIERSANTI. Steve PIERSANTI, I mean, you have been so instrumental in the publishing industry, in my industry. I'm a leadership professor. I know the things that you produce, but it was 1992, I think. It's almost 30 years since you founded Berrett Koehler in San Francisco. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you're going to pull out of the bag on that 30th anniversary celebration. But you've done everything. You've been president. You founded it. You've been president. You're surrounded in your home office by manuscripts and I don't know what else. The three books that I had before I even knew of your existence, the three books that I have in my collection that I still refer to today, that I think are significant in terms of defining Berrett Koehler for me. Margaret Wheatley's Leadership and the New Science. That was amazing in the late 90s, I think it was. Peter Block's Stewardship.
Actually, that was actually Leadership and the New Science was 1992. It was one of the first
one of the early ones. I picked it up in 99. I apologize. So that was one of your births, as it were, your early successes. That's an amazing piece of work.
Yeah. When she sent me the manuscript, it was actually, she sent me the manuscript in the fall of 1991, even before Berrett Koehler was incorporated. And I was already a very experienced editor. I'd already been the president of another publishing company. I already really knew the literature very well. I received the manuscript for Leadership, the New Science, and I said, this is just incredible. This is beyond anything I've ever seen as an editor before. This book is going to make you famous. It's going to sell 100,000 copies, and it's going to change the whole field. And that all turned out to be prophetic. The book actually sold about 400,000 copies.
Yeah.
But it was one of the first 3 books we published. It was an incredible way to start out a new publishing company.
It was awesome. Yeah, we could spend an hour and a half talking about that, but let's put that to one side because there's so much I want to get to. The other 2 that I have to mention because they're personal favorites: Peter Block's Stewardship, and I think he went on to do Community. I think that may have been with you as well. But his work, of course, on flawless consulting was huge anyway. But then these were much more, and I think it's much more Berrett Koehler's style in some ways to allow people to explore things that seem really important to them. You are a publishing house with a mission. You take great care of your authors. Do you have some insight? Were you working on Peter Block's books at that time?
Yeah, I had been Peter's editor at Josie Bass Publishers before I started Berrett Koehler. And then so I was thrilled when Peter and I, when I was in the process of starting Berrett Koehler, we started talking about stewardship. And that book, we actually started working on it again before Berrett Koehler was formally incorporated in 1992. It came out in 1993, and it was our second big bestseller. And it has been hugely influential. Not in the publishing industry. I mean, the leadership area and business, but also in our own company. Much of what we do as a company has been influenced by the ideas in stewardship, and it's been a bestseller. We've sold about 180,000 copies of it. So it's been hugely influential.
Yeah, and I love the way, and anybody who goes to the Berrett Koehler site will see, videos from staff members, long-standing staff members. It is a great way that you run that business. The third one, though, I think is Joe Jaworski's Synchronicity, which is just an amazing read, and it at times seems almost stream of consciousness, but it's very thought-provoking and stays with me to this day. Tell me you were involved in that.
Yeah, I was the editor for that book as well. And of course we published Joe's follow-on book, Source. So we published both of his books, and Synchronicity was another huge hit. We've sold maybe 150,000 copies of it. Very influential as well. Back to stewardship, we give every new employee at our company a copy of Stewardship, and really try and have our company practices and culture and policies reflect a lot of the ideas in the book.
Yeah.
What's going on there is, as a company, we try and eat our own cooking. We try and learn from the books we publish, which makes us somewhat distinctive in viewing that the books we publish become the pattern for how we're trying to run the company.
Yeah. Yeah, and a colleague of mine, LYNDA GRATTON, mentioned you because you were her editor on Hotspots, I think, and then I think she developed with you, I think, Glow as well, and so this is the reason that I wanted to speak to you for so long, and I've only just been able to make it happen. But she describes you as the best editor she's ever had. Now, she's worked for a range of different publishers across the US and UK and Europe, had huge success very recently. But for her to say that, Steve, and you're still editing today, you are still editing books today, you're still midwife to these amazing masterpieces. What is it, Steve, about particularly the process of editing? Because I think some of the other things that you had your hands in, you've passed on to others now, but you're still an editor at heart. What is it about editing? What makes you want to see these things into print?
Thank you. Well, yeah, I've been an editor for now 37 years. I became an editor in 1982. I actually started out in book publishing in 1977 as an advertising copywriter at Josie Bass Publishers. Then I became a marketing director, and then I moved over to becoming an editor in 82. And then later on, I became editorial director, and then executive vice president and president Josie Bass Publishers before I left there in 91 and founded Berrett Koehler in 92. I like to say that I'm still an advertising copywriter masquerading as an editor, masquerading as a company president. What I really am still is an advertising copywriter at heart. And so my editorial approach is to bring a lot of marketing focus, a lot of marketing ways of fashioning messages, of getting at what's the core message of a book, how can we communicate it quickly. That's a large part of how I approach being an editor. Then I would say also, what I'm always trying to do is what I call fulfill the measure of the author's creation. Fulfill the measure of the author's creation. I'm trying to work with the author to figure out what is the author really trying to do, and not just with this book, but in the world, and how is this book going to help bring about what the author is trying to do, and what's the full measure of the author's creation. And so that's the quest that I'm on with every author I work with, and one of the reasons that I can be successful. I'd say the other thing is just that I have a lot of experience. I'm probably the most experienced business book editor in the United States, and maybe one of the most experienced in the world, with 37 years as a business book editor, and that helps. And then the other thing I would say is that I'm unique in that I've been the president of 2 publishing companies. And so I bring an executive mindset and experience and point of view, someone who had to meet payroll, who does corporate strategy, who deals with corporate culture, all the challenges of business I've had firsthand. But during all this time that I was an executive, I always held on to being an editor myself. Perhaps foolishly, because I really didn't have time to also be an editor and be the company president, the company CEO, but I still did. And then a year earlier this year, I stepped down from being company president and CEO of Berrett Koehler Publishers, and am continuing on as a full-time editor. I've always had these 2 roles, but the one I always liked the best and I felt I was best at was being an editor. So I've kept that role, and I've given up the role of being CEO and president, and we have a new CEO and COO and a new president and publisher at Berrett Koehler, and they're doing extraordinarily well. And so it was a great decision, and I'm very happy now being able to devote all of my time to being an editor.
Yeah. I mean, you are a very, direct guy, and I can see that, even in our limited interactions we've had, do you have this phrase, you suffer fools gladly, I think is a phrase that I might use to describe you. Very direct, very clear. And that also, I suspect,
I don't think I've ever used that phrase, but I do try and be pretty direct, yes. And and authors like that. They want you to be direct, both about what's working and what's not working in there.
The unvarnished truth, and I think that's so valuable for the new authors or would-be authors, and we'll get to those in a moment. But another reason I wanted to speak to you is you've written widely on the state of the market, the publishing market, and it struck me as something that new authors or would-be authors, entrepreneurs, business owners, professional specialists who might be smart and know about their own industry, their own profession, don't necessarily have the insight that you do. And I wondered if you could give a quick pencil sketch of the state of the publishing market, because that may allow us to explore the challenges facing the new author in the years and decades to come. What's your take then on the current state of the publishing market? You're at this unique position, having been president CEO of 2 companies, and now to take a sort of external role, if you like, not an external role, you're still heavily involved in the business, but a sort of outsider's perspective. Where that's the wrong phrase, Steve. What's your take on the state of the publishing market at the moment?
Yeah, there are both good things and not so good things about the state of the publishing market. On the good side, long form content has held its value. There are short form content, articles, newspaper articles, magazine articles have lost much of their value, wow. And those industries have really struggled. long form content, i.e. book publishing, has kept its value. Not all of its value. We're still pricing books at about the same level we priced them at 27 years ago when Berrett Koehler was founded. And so, and meanwhile, with inflation and so on, it means that book publishing may have lost like close to half of its value,
Yeah.
but it's still kept a lot of its value. And that's the good side. Book publishing revenues have not plummeted. They have not crashed. On the positive side also, we've had the huge explosion of digital publishing, which went from almost nothing to being a major part of book publishing revenues. And there was a time when people were afraid that ebooks were going to be the death of printed books, that you'd get into a death spiral where more and more of the sales went to ebooks. And so you had to do smaller sales of print books, and that meant smaller print runs, and smaller print runs meant less profitable and selling fewer copies, which got you into a downward spiral where you're doing smaller and smaller print runs, and the economics just wouldn't work. But then right at the point where everyone was predicting this, digital publishing, ebooks plateaued in about 2012. And then it became clear that digital books and print books were going to coexist, that print books were not going to go away, and neither were digital books going to go away. They were going to coexist, just like today we still have radio, we still have motion pictures, we still have television, while we have the internet, while we have social media. All the media are coexisting, and that's what's happening. So that's good news in that printed books are still going to stay around, even as we've had the growth of digital books. And then at the same time, we've had enormous growth in the last few years of audio books, particularly digital audio, where that's become the fastest growing area of book publishing has been audiobooks in the last several years. And so that's all good. The industry in one respect is healthy in the sense that many publishing companies, including Berrett Koehler, are profitable, and our revenues are not falling. In our case, they've been growing. They've been growing substantially over recent years. So that's all the positive.
Yeah.
And
I'm very taken with with what you say about holding its value, as distinct to the magazines and the newspapers who are struggling desperately, and that's the industry that I came from. So that isn't something I'd necessarily thought of, because newspapers and magazines are still there, but I think even some of the local newspapers, big city newspapers, the metros, are turning into charitable institutions to philanthropy just to carry on serving their communities. But we haven't seen that in the publishing community yet. The short form content, they mostly have to give it away, or if they are selling it, it's just digitally with really pennies on the dollar in terms of what income they're getting from it. To sign up for a digital subscription to a major newspaper is super, super cheap. Yeah. So those are the positives. Do I sense some negatives coming?
Well, yes. So in 2004, 15 years ago, I started putting out an article called "The 10 Awful Truths About Book Publishing." And then I would update it every few years, the 10 Awful Truths About Book Publishing. It's been widely distributed in the publishing world. Perhaps hundreds of thousands of people have read it over time. And when I first started it, I was just trying to understand better why so many authors found that their experience in publishing was very disappointing, that their books didn't sell nearly as many copies as they wanted. Their books were not as widely available in bookstores as they wanted. And I started observing even back in 2004, that the average bookstore only stocked, your book had a less than a 1 in 100 chance of being on a shelf in a bookstore, just because of the sheer numbers of books there were and the number of shelf spaces there were. There just wasn't room for them. And I was just trying to understand the market. Well, what's happened since 2004 is that the 10 Awful Truths have gotten more and more awful every year in some respects. And so just to give you an example, peak year for book sales in the United States was 2007. That was the year when the book sales hit their high watermark in the United States. Since then, they have been either flat or slightly down every year since 2007. But the good news is they haven't collapsed.
Yeah.
They've declined a little, but they haven't declined a lot since 2007. The bad news is that the number of books being published has just exploded. It has more than quadrupled, or almost 5 times what it was in 2007. And the marketplace has not grown, so that means that it's harder and harder for each new book to find a market. And this has gotten worse in recent years. And so R.R. Bowker just released its report a few weeks ago about the number of books that were self-published in the United States in 2018, and it was 1,677,000, which was up from 1,192,000 in 2017, up from 805,000 in 2016. Go back to 2013, it was only 461,000, almost, much smaller back in 2007. Yeah. And so the number being self-published has just exploded.
Yeah.
Number being commercially published has been going up as well, but nothing at all like the number being self-published. And so what we have now is 2 million new books being put into the market just from the United States in 1 year. That doesn't include all the books being published in English in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, in India, other English-speaking countries around the world, just in the United States. And the market just cannot absorb all of these books. So the market has become glutted, it has become saturated, it has become oversaturated, and the average sales of new titles has been plummeting.
Yeah.
The average new book published today sells less than 2,000 copies over its lifetime.
Yeah.
And a lot of books that are self-published only sell 100 copies or a few hundred copies. But it's just become very difficult to make any new book work. I can keep going, or did you want to?
I'm just sitting here with my jaw open. I thought I knew some of this stuff, but the depth that you've gone to in this, and your understanding, and clearly there are going to be huge implications, which I hope we can come on to with the for new writers. People who are not new to this market will just say to a colleague in communications, or I don't know, to somebody transcribing the thoughts of the chairman or the chairwoman, get this book out there and expect it to be in every airport bookshelf. Well, you've just shown that isn't going to happen. Not without a few very careful thoughts from the advertising copywriter sitting in front of me.
Yeah, well, and so what's happened is the number of new books has exploded, while the marketplace has stayed flat or slightly down, and so it's harder and harder to get any new book to work.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing, when you have a crowded marketplace, brands stand out.
Yeah.
And so books that have achieved a brand, they're selling as well as ever. So, for example, our books by Ken Blanchard, because he's a brand, they continue to sell well.
Yes.
Our book Eat That Frog, which is a brand,
Tracy,
we've sold 2.3 million copies that Eat That Frog. Or Leadership and Self-Deception, and the Arbinger Institute has published several books, all of which have been huge sellers. Leadership and Self-Deception has sold over 2.3 million copies. It's a brand.
Right.
And so the brands stand out. But what that means is that slim pickings for all the other books. It means that the new authors trying to break in have a harder and harder time every year to break in because more and more of the marketplace is going to brands.
Yes.
Now, this is starting to be somewhat recognized. A few weeks ago, there was an article, it's actually beginning of November, in Publishers Weekly called "Is Publishing Too Top Heavy?"
Yeah.
And the thrust of that article in Publishers Weekly was basically that more and more of the sales are going to a smaller and smaller number of books.
Yes.
And again, it's this phenomenon that brands stand out, and it's hard when everything's so crowded. People go to brands because they don't know what to do when there's just so much being thrown at them. Another implication of this phenomenon is that authors have to do more and more of the marketing.
Yeah.
The only way that publishers have to stay afloat when the size of the market has either been flat or going down, and the average sales of each title has been plummeting, the only way publishers have stayed afloat is to shift more and more of the marketing to authors. And so in many cases, authors are doing more of the marketing than publishers are doing, and they're driving more of the sales. And it doesn't mean the publishers don't matter, because publishers still set the table. They still get the book in channels that the author couldn't do on the author's own.
Yes.
But whether the book actually moves in the channel often depends on what the author is doing in speaking, in social media, in writing articles and being interviewed, in corporate clients or bulk sales or back of the room sales, or all the ways that the authors are supporting the sales of their books.
Yeah, and that is vitally important for us to get out, because I think a lot of successful executives, successful entrepreneurs, business owners will just assume somebody will do that for them, but actually it's them. They are the personal brand behind the book, behind the title. That they're the ones that people are going to want to hear and to invite onto the TV shows or the radio shows. So that's a really, really powerful point you make there. I want to come on in a moment to there's a book I'm reading at the moment. It's more to do with the fiction world, called The Bestseller Code. I'm sure you've come across it. A couple of academics have put a bunch of fictional books into some kind of AI system to figure out what makes the ideal bestseller. So I want to come there a little bit later on. Is there a way, with your super editor's hat on, to sort of help authors really put that together? But this, what you're saying now, is fascinating stuff. The social channels, are they making any difference to authors being able to? We know that they are going to have to take a greater responsibility for getting the word out there. Does social help in any way?
We and all publishers today pay a lot of attention to the extent of authors' social media connections, contacts across different platforms. We ask for that information in book proposals. We work with authors to leverage their social media. And so it is very important. That said, it's still authors speaking before audiences probably does more to drive sales in most cases. There are exceptions. There are exceptions where the social media is really what's driving sales. But authors speaking before audiences is still hugely impactful on book sales. And authors having email addresses,
Yes.
Email actually has more impact on a one-for-one basis than the social media, but often social media authors have so many larger social media followings than they have email lists. So there are various authors. Some authors, what is driving sales is they have a radio program, or they have a newspaper column or a magazine column. Others, what's driving sales is they have huge social media numbers. Others do lots of speaking. Others just have lots of connections and are getting other people, other organizations to support their books. It has to always be something, though. The author can't really expect a book to work without having some way of helping to reach the market.
Yeah. Okay. Any other aspects of, I guess, I suppose I'm wondering if everything is plateaued, if we've got to where the market will eventually, have we got 5 years, 10 years of this, or are there things happening that will still change the dynamics for us on the publishing side and the new authors? Is this the new normal, or is there more change coming down the turnpike?
Yeah. Well, publishing is a dynamic industry, and it's changing dramatically every year. So you had starting around 2008, 2009, 2007, really 2007, 8, 9. You had the beginnings of the growth of ebooks, Kindle, and so on, and then you had the ebooks plateauing. But you had the digital audio taking off in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, digital audio taking off. And so I'm sure that there will be other changes, because it's such a dynamic industry. I should also say that this is all added a lot of complexity to publishing. If you go back 20 years, publishers just had one format, print.
Yeah.
And then they also had digital, but they didn't just have one digital format, they had multiple digital formats, at least two, Universal PDF and EPUB or Kindle.
Yes.
And now you've got audio, but you have multiple audio formats, yes. CDs, but you also have digital audio, and the CD market is rapidly declining. And most of the audio sales are now digital audio sales.
And the streaming services. What you mentioned digital very, very, well. I think it's well worth bringing that to the forefront, because my podcast automatically appears on SoundCloud. It goes to Spotify now. I mean, to have a podcast on Spotify is like crazy, because that's where I listen to my music. But now people are going to be asking, can you find me a podcast on X? So it may be that search and digital search could be a way that authors and publishers get their work found, is by asking Alexa or whoever you get your machine from. It could be audio search rather than even just digital search, finding it on Amazon or whatever. Right. So you're very wise, I think, to keep us alert to that.
Yeah. So the upshot is that we as a publisher, we now release every new publication that we publish in 5 formats at once.
Wow.
In print, in 2 ebook formats, and in 2 audio formats. So 5 at once. So that makes our whole business much more complex.
Yeah.
And I think you wanted to go to talking about what can authors do in response to novel truths.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, given this complexity and ongoing complexity, we don't know what's going to arrive. What can they do? I mean, clearly, I'm going to urge folks to talk to you and to men and women with your skill set. Those skills are still hugely needed to help focus on creating a powerful manuscript in the first case, because it seems to me that if I read something that was great, I would recommend it to my own community. So that almost seems to be the place to start. Or am I wrong? What do you think?
Yeah, and so I should clarify that my experience is primarily with nonfiction. I don't have a fiction experience. So most of what I'm going to say now is really referring to nonfiction. But in line with what you just said, much of the sales today of books are pass-along sales. It's not individuals going out and buying the books for themselves. Somebody is buying it for them.
Wow.
A CEO buying the books for all the department heads. It's a department head buying it for all the team leaders. It's a coach buying the book for all the people that she coaches. It's a consultant using a book in a change program.
Right.
It's a trainer using the book in a training program. It's an activist using the book with the people the activist is trying to influence. It's a professor using a book in a course. But it's somebody who's buying the book for others and passing along. Therefore, one of the main ways of marketing now is for authors to figure out who are going to be their pass-alongers, and how can they reach out to the pass-alongers, and what's going to lead the pass-alongers to give out their books in the dozens or the hundreds or the thousands.
So bulk sales more important than ever before.
Yes, absolutely. And authors play a huge role in lining up those book sales, because a lot of the pass alongers will be people that are already in their communities.
Yes.
That are part of their contact bases.
Yes.
Another important way of responding to these 10 awful truths is that events and immersion experiences often replace traditional publicity moving the needle. A lot of the kinds of publicity that worked 10, 15, 20 years ago don't really move the needle anymore, because there's just so much being thrown at us in the media. It's harder and harder for any one media article or interview to have an effect. And so that brings us back to the speaking. If you hear an author speak for a half an hour, you're more likely to buy the book than if you just hear an interview with 3 minutes, a little snippet on the radio. And so the more authors can be doing what I call immersion experiences or an event, that's going to generate more sales than just being interviewed for a few minutes.
So bookshop signings on their own as such, not necessarily a good thing, but if you can speak and then, I don't know, go on a town bookshop, that might help.
Yeah, well, it's not just bookshop signings. I mean, it's speaking before the Kiwanis Club, or speaking before it could be a bookshop signing, but there's more. I mean, you're coming to the bookshop signing not just to sign the book, but you're hearing the author speak for an hour.
Yes.
Or it's taking place in a community event, or something like that.
Yes.
You also want to be publishers work a lot with authors to leverage the authors' communities, and that goes back to the pass along sales. You know, who are the authors? Who are their communities? Who cares about what they do? That's become huge. People sometimes refer to that as what is the author's platform, and this is kind of another way of saying that.
Yes.
I've already talked about how you turn books into brands.
Yes.
And that can drive sales. The other main thing that's going on is people have more and more different demands in their time. They're more and more spread out, have less and less time they perceive to sit down and read books. And so the implication of that is you really need to front load the ideas in books, because people may not read the whole book.
Yeah.
They may only read the part of it. And so you want to front load the ideas in books. You want to build the book around a big new idea, so that people get the message of the book even without having to read the whole book.
Yeah.
If they have to read the whole book, the book is not going to work. In order to get the message, you have to build the books around a big idea. Short books are doing better generally than long books. And again, this is nonfiction. It's not necessarily true.
I understand. Short books, what, 70, 80,000 words?
Oh, no, a short book would be 25 or 30,000 words.
Okay.
The mid-sized book would be 40 to 50,000 words. A long book would be 60,000 words and above.
Wow.
Books have gotten shorter, especially the ones that are selling the best.
Yes. Well, that's a huge insight. I come at this as someone who's very comfortable crafting words, and so my advice has been way out of ballpark here. So I need to tighten up with the advice that I'm giving. Thank you for that. That's really helpful, because people aren't used to writing anymore. It seems to me, Steve. We're not a nation of writers. We're even in schools. You know, the essays are getting shorter and shorter. So we get into the business world, and it's one line or one word emails. The thought of 25 or 30 or 40 or 50,000 words, that's scaring some people away when they've actually got a really good message that could be tightened up. It's almost full circle back to you as editor, and so I would love to spend a ton more time exploring this vast amount of knowledge that you have. But let's think about wrapping it up with, I mean, what would you say to an exec and a business owner, someone who thinks they've got an idea, what are the questions that you would ask them if they were sitting down to think about crafting a proposal for you? What are you looking for with your advertising copywriter's head on?
Well, I start out by asking the author, what is the author's message? What is the message you're trying to get out into the world? And often these individuals will not really be able to state it very clearly or very succinctly. And so we'll spend our first conversation about just trying to refine the author's message. Sometimes we'll go several rounds, 3 or 4 or 5 rounds, just trying to get the author's message as clear as it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, we can see on the Berrett Koehler website the information that you're providing for people who want to craft and write proposals. And then you must be quite harsh on people, because you only really want to pick individuals that you think are going to A, have a great message, and B, are going to be capable of seeing it through, and that it sits well with your portfolio. What are the sort of next stages in that conversation for you?
Well, we receive, as a publisher, over 1,000 book projects proposed to us a year. We only publish about 40 new books a year, and so we're enormously selective. That said, and so we do a lot of screening before we even will engage with an author. We want to have some sense that the book is a good fit with our list, that it fits the kinds of things that we do, that the author has a strong knowledge base, the author has things to offer. But if the authors do kind of make that first cut, then we're very engaging. We'll work with the author in shaping the ideas and in trying to make something that can work. It's not I wouldn't, it's a learning, developing experience for authors, but I think most of them really welcome it.
Yeah. So many people see this see a book as a marketing tool. It's just something to throw off and get it out there, and it's going to do a bunch of work on its own to drive, I guess, customers back. Of course, there are other men and women who want to leave a legacy where the book is perhaps not a means to an end, but an end in itself. They've got something they want to say, and those, I wonder if some of those writers are going to miss out as publishing becomes a bit more, how can we firstly cover our costs, but also, create something that will be passed on, that will be something that other people want to buy. I wonder if we're beginning to see, or will begin to see, books becoming a bit more, not commercial, but mercenary perhaps, than being books that just have a wonderful, wonderful message. I wonder if you have a thought on that.
Well, I think the secret of our success when we're doing well with an author is that we're helping the author really figure out and communicate the author's message. It's what I call getting down to bedrock. Yes. What is the core message that the author has that distinguishes this from what other books, other writers have written? What's really going to change in the world? The Berrett Koehler's mission is connecting people and ideas to create a world that works for all. And so with every book that we work on, we're working with authors to figure out, how is this book going to help create a world that works for all? What good is this book going to do in the world? We don't do books just because they might be popular. Yeah. Each book needs to be helping us create a world that works for all. And so and thankfully, by getting down to bedrock about the author's real foundational message, the real core message, that also helps sell the books.
Yeah, yeah. Steve, it's been an absolute blast to talk to you, and there's so much still left to plumb. I might bore you in another year or so and come back and see what you've been working on. How can people contact you? Through the website? Is there a public web email you're willing to share?
Well, on our website, it has our book proposal guidelines, and there is an email address in which people can use to submit a book proposal. We work with many agents, dozens of agents, but we also accept submissions without agents. You don't have to have an agent to submit a book proposal to us. And it's right there on the website, all the instructions for how to prepare the proposal and how to send it in.
Awesome. I will make sure that those are listed along with the podcast notes. Again, thank you so much for your time today. I've had an absolute blast. I have to go away and change a lot of things that I'm doing because I heard it from you, and for that I think speaks volumes. Listen, thanks so much. I've had an absolute blast today.
Thank you, Stephen. My pleasure.
Are you sitting here thinking, what did I just spend the last 40 minutes doing? I've got cramp in my hands. I did the interview and I've written 6 pages of notes. The man is an insane source of wisdom. Alok, you just made this amazing point. You and I are not afraid of writing, are we? And then you say something like 25,000 word books. I just remember reading your manuscript for Achieving Successful Business Outcomes, and it was not 25,000 words, was it? Having said that, I don't think necessarily it's about the shortness of the book. I think if you can create a good book with a good message and good marketing, that it will still continue to make a difference in the world. So some awesome points there. As this is our last point of interview, I want to just pull this all together. But can you see why I kept this to the end of the summit? This has been a profoundly significant interview and a real counterpoint to LYNDA at the other end. LYNDA is saying thought leadership, I'm going to share my message, and here is a guy saying it's absolutely important that you, yes, have a great big new idea, but you also simultaneously, you can't separate this. You have to be thinking, how am I going to get the message out there? So who are your pass-alongers? Who are the men and women who have access to other networks that you can connect with? And so you connect with the pass-alongers and they will spread the message to others. So as part of your book writing plan and structuring plan, think who are the intermediaries, the pass-alongers who are going to spread the message out there simultaneously with writing the book, not separate at all. You don't write the manuscript and then think, oh, well, we'll find the right people for this later. You write for the market, but you write knowing the channels that you're going to get the market through. Second part of that, so big new idea. What's your message? Really got to reflect on that. Who are the pass-alongers? And then the final point that's a real humdinger for me is you've got to reach the market. Whether you are considering going with a mainstream publisher or whether you're considering tackling the project yourself, whether you're going to self-publish. So it's immaterial. The question of mainstream publisher or self-publish is immaterial because you are going to have to manage the end state. So here's you with your idea, then you can go mainstream or self-publish, but ultimately you're going to have to market. You're going to have to identify the eventual readers and decide how to get through that. So all that the choice of publisher does is manage the risk, the costs of creating the book in the first place. A mainstream publisher will take the risk of printing the thing, but you still have to provide the market and the marketing. Or you self-publish and you take a little bit of the risk on printing a few copies, but you're still going to have to do that piece anyway. So the diamond, if you like, makes the mechanism for reaching the market immaterial. The thing to be thinking about is, what's your message? What's the book you want to write? Who are you writing it for? You can decide later how you get the book out there. So a lovely, lovely interview, a lovely way to finish this summit. Ultimately, of course, the question for you is, are you going to do anything now? After 14 hours of listening to these interviews, I know on the replay you might have listened to this out of sequence, but there's so much value in here that I want you to be thinking, what are you going to do next? I'm not going to go over the key points here. It's been an absolute blast working with you over the last 14 hours. I think that the final points that I would offer you as a next steps are, at the very least, sign up for our podcast. You can find the podcast at Authors Channel. Go to iTunes, search there, subscribe on iTunes. I don't think it's called iTunes anymore. I think it's Apple Music. I'm just so old-fashioned. At authors.fm, is our site where we host the podcast. We also have written transcripts of some of those interviews. You'll find some of these videos already there. Season 2 is about to launch. And also, I suggest that you, to get the toolkit, the practical toolkit, you need to go to youshouldwriteabook.co.uk. That will give you the 12 stages of writing a book, and it'll help you get through that process. Make sure you get the Author's Grid app. That will help keep you accountable. If you want somebody to keep you accountable, we can help you with that as well. Jacqueline and I would be absolutely delighted to work with you to help make your book a reality, to ask you some of these difficult questions, but that's for another time. Before you go, perhaps you'd like this video. If you thought Steve's interview was helpful to you in any way, if you wouldn't mind liking it, that tells YouTube that this is a useful theme and a useful idea. It means that other people will find, when they search for book publishing and so on, they will find Steve as much as they'll find us. So thank you for that. Any final questions, let me know. I've got a couple of minutes before I knock off for the day. I'd be interested to hear your comments and insights, and you can come back and add comments to these videos later, by the way. If you add your thoughts in the comments, I will respond to them because those come direct to me. But thank you so much for participating. I guess I would just say, make a mark. Make a mark. How are you going to change the world? It was that final statement by Steve. A world that works for all. What good is your book going to do in the world? And that is a profound question that only you can answer. I've had an absolute blast. I look forward to meeting you again online, ideally in face-to-face, if we can get past this particular pandemic. But thank you so much for watching, and take care. I'll see you again soon. Let's have one last matrix.